Welcome to Videoscape's session on growing the connected TV market for everyone. My name is Colin DIXON, founder and chief analyst at Endscreen Media. Endscreen Media is a free resource to you. Lots of news, comments, opinions, and free data. So please visit that site. We have a very interesting session this afternoon. As I say, we're talking about growing the connected TV market for everybody. And we really do have a panel of experts here for you. And I'm not going to waste any time at all. One thing I will say, though, is that we are seeing strong growth in connected TV at the beginning of this year. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about first. So I'm going to ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves and to answer an opening question. Basically, that question is, from your perspective, has COVID-19 viewing accelerated the growth of the CTV market? So why don't we get started with you, Roma? Please introduce yourself and let us know what you think about on that question.
Thanks, Colin, and hi, everyone. My name is Roma KOJIMA, and I am the manager of a service called CBC GEM, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's English language OTT service. It's been in the market in this way for well over 5 years now, but as an evolution of the on-demand player, much like many broadcasters around the world have had for some time. Currently, CBC GEM has over 5,000 hours of video on-demand content, 15 linear streams, as well as a growing volume of live stream video, which includes everything from press conferences to live sports when we have them from Canada and around the world. The other thing about CBC GEM, before I jump to the question, is that it is a hybrid subscription model. And what that means is that we've always combined AVOD and ad-free SVOD that sits under a subscription layer. And however, we do not serve ads or any kind of subscription tier against any of our children's content, offering a very safe environment for young children to consume a pretty solid library of children video on demand. And then to the question, from my perspective, I think it's a terror. I'm gonna open with the worst quote. I think it's the worst of times and the best of times. I think that in this awful situation that we're all facing, OTT services, I think, are in the kind of a right place, right time situation, and especially those like GEM that offer news coverage and live streams, because we've seen our viewership across all platforms, but definitely across connected TV, accelerate beyond anything. I think people are they're at home, they're looking for information, they need to know what's going on, they're looking for entertainment, and they're looking for escape. And then, those of us with young children, for example, that are trying to work and juggle all this stuff that's going on and trying to run a homeschool and a job at the same time, I think offering that safe environment that allows kids to you could just plunk your kid down in front of the TV, so to speak, and what's going to be in front of them. That's been a big driver of this increased consumption.
Very good. Gary, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Gary WOOLF. I'm the EVP of Strategic Development at All3 Media International, which is the distribution business of the All3 Media Group. So the group owns something like 34 production companies, and we're co-owned by Discovery and Liberty Global. So what my role means is that I'm responsible for the various digital plays that we have in the market outside of what I would call what is now a traditional run of business model. So, those kind of Netflix and Amazon co-productions we put with our sales team because it's like a premium pay service, if you like. And so I'm responsible for all the other things that we release. So that, we've got a significant number of hours now on the big AVOD services across the States and into the UK. We have our own branded services. So we have 2 AVOD services launching imminently, So Real and So Dramatic. And they'll sit on services like Vizio, Stir, Tubi Channels, Jude, that kind of thing. We have our own SVOD service, Inside Outside, in partnership with TV4 Entertainment. And then we also publish stuff on Amazon Prime Video Direct. So we have lots of different views of the marketplace. So, to your question, Colin, so has COVID-19 accelerated the growth of CTV? Well, look, I think what we're seeing is certainly a rise in viewing. Certainly if I look at the numbers that we're getting reported from the platforms, they're all NDA, so I can't quote them, but we are seeing those numbers go up. When you hear those platforms talking and giving out data, I think it was Tubi TV the other week said that their viewing is up 150% year on year. Now, some of that is people watching more content, and some of it is going to be increased distribution to, an increasing number of sets that are in the household, including connected TV sets. If you look at audience measurement, again, I think Vizio was saying that their ad team have seen something like a 50% hike in over-the-top viewing, minutes viewed per user. And our insight team, when we look at Barb, the UK is a bit different. So we have to rely on unmatched viewing if we're not looking at broadcaster VOD. And what they're telling me is that the Barb data is showing us 46-minute per day increase in unmatched viewing during the lockdown period. Now, we can't say that's absolutely CTV, but there's a pretty fair bet that a lot of it will be. So, to what Roma was saying, I think, it's a terrible thing that's happening at the moment, but I think a lot of these services are in the right place at the right time. And I guess the big unknown in this is whether the viewing behavior now during lockdown encourages that ongoing behavior as we sort of see the situation ease.
Indeed, I wonder myself, is this one of those step functions where we just grow from this new increased usage level? I don't know. I guess that's something that we can talk about on the panel. Wim, please introduce yourself.
Hey, Colin and everyone else, thank you for having me. I think it's pretty hard to follow Roma and Gary with anything new. I can only but agree. So my name is Wim Ponnet. I'm the Chief Strategy and Commercial Officer for the Endemol Shine Group. We are the largest independent TV production company in the world, with a pretty large catalog, over 66,000 hours, currently owned by Disney and Apollo Global, and in the process of being acquired by Banijay Group, which will ultimately create the an indie behemoth with hours and hours of unscripted and scripted content suited for all sorts of platforms, whether that is linear, OTT, or connected TV. I can only subscribe, I think, to what Roma and Gary have already said, which is, yes, massive increased viewership and engagement. People want content. The only difference we are probably seeing on the content we produce versus the news content and that very relevant content now is that we are seeing an increased viewership on our catalog, on content that actually makes people feel good, escapism in that sense, and things you probably wouldn't expect, like game shows, some of the feel-good reality TV, where people want to feel they are connected to normal people, and probably the fact we've all been confined in our homes for such a long period of time is no stranger to what's driving that.
Very good, and I've got lots of follow-up questions. I'm just noting one right there. That's very interesting. Interesting that people are turning to that feel-good content. Henry, please introduce yourself, and what are you seeing with C19 viewing, and do you think it's a big step function, a big change?
Yeah, sure. Hi guys. I'm Henry Embleton, head of ad products and revenue for Crunchyroll. Crunchyroll is sort of the largest destination for anime. For those of you who don't know what anime is, it's sort of Japanese sort of long form animation. It's been around for a very long time, and a lot of people have this misconception that it's a sort of niche, weird genre that's sort of tucked away in the corner. And well, I can say it's very much not the case. It's certainly growing and expanding, and the profile of anime is raising very much. We have similar to obviously into Roma was mentioning as well. We have an AVOD proposition and an SVOD proposition, and the two of them work in a symbiosis. And the idea, of course, is to move as many users across the curve from AVOD to SVOD. And then, of course, we have a second streaming service based here just in the US called Verve, which is an aggregator, which has all of Crunchyroll's content into it, but also as well, it has a lot of what we would consider sort of fandom related content. So escape, fantasy, adventure, sci-fi, Dungeons and Dragons, swords, magic, those kind of things, which really focuses on that verticalized audience. And again, the model is the same of AVOD and SVOD. So to answer your question directly on the sort of the COVID-19 sort of bump, if you like, I think one thing that's for sure is that COVID has accelerated a lot of things in this world, and one of those definitely is connected TV viewing. To give you guys sort of like a sense, I mean, we've seen just consumption absolutely explode all around the world and all around our territories for Crunchyroll. I mean, it's gone up sort of nearly 3x in some cases from when the beginning of this pandemic really began to sort of take hold. So that just gives you a sense. What we are beginning to see now, which is interesting, and I'm beginning to wonder about, is saturation. I think we're getting to that point where maybe we're sort of beginning to top off and people are beginning to get a little bit of fatigue from the screen time. And we're certainly seeing that in the data and the consumption. I don't know if that's because people are sort of beginning to be able to loosen up and go outside a bit more, or if you are sort of beginning to hit that ceiling of, you know, I can only consume so much content for so many days and so many hours in the day.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing that as well, Henry. I'm looking at some recent Nielsen data that showed actually things have pulled back a little bit, but it seems to be settling at a much higher level. But anyway, let's introduce Chris. Chris, please introduce yourself and what are you seeing?
Hi all, I'm Chris Wright. I'm Group Business Director at Vivo. For those of you unfamiliar with Vivo, we are an all-premium music video provider owned by Sony and Universal Music Groups. Really, our business exists to connect both global stars and emerging artists with audiences around the world through a combination of official music videos and also original content. My role within the commercial team is to monetize that content across all of the 55 markets in which we operate. And I personally have a specific focus on Omnicom, Group M and their associated clients. In terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the growth of connected TV, it's something, and you know, echoing what the other guys have said as well, something we've seen happen in a really profound way. We've been keenly monitoring it over the last few weeks, of course, like everyone else has. It was already our fastest growing platform by some distance and had been accelerating over the last 2 to 3 years. So the onset of the lockdown measures really just helped to accentuate that trend even further. We've seen around about, I mean, it varies by market, but around about a 30 to 40% uptick in living room streams versus pre-lockdown times. And it was really interesting actually to be able to track the growth in real time across different regions as they were all affected differently, and then subsequently introduce those measures. So more and more people spending time at home. We saw initial uplift across APAC, and then in Europe with the worst affected markets like Italy and France and Spain and the UK seeing the steepest growth. And then in turn that growth extended to the Americas as well. And just to try to find a bit of texture to that, we've been working recently in the last few months with an insight company called T-Vision, and they use automatic content and facial recognition technology. So they can determine when it comes to living room viewing, who's in the room and what level of attention they're paying to our content. Pre-lockdown times, it was just under 3/4 of our sessions were viewed by 2 or more people. That co-viewing factor has dramatically increased every single month. So not only are we seeing greater numbers in terms of headline streams, but these streams also have more people watching them as well. So we've in turn clearly seen a surge in the attention that brand partners are paying to that, and we've experienced more commercial demand for living room inventory on top of what we were seeing before COVID-19 hit.
That's one of the things that really shocked me, Chris. I was looking at some Nielsen data for the US yesterday, and what they said was that SVOD now is attracting more co-viewing than traditional television, quite a bit more as well. And that's a big change from say just 3 years ago, where it was the reverse. So that's a very interesting facet that I wasn't expecting to see, that there will be a dramatic increase in co-viewing. And it's really interesting that there's a lot of co-viewing for people that are watching your music videos. So maybe this is some home partying going on. I don't know. Yeah. There was one thing that Wim, you said that I thought was very interesting, and I wanted to follow up with you in particular, but generally the group of you, with all of you. Obviously, there's been some very big impacts on specific content types. So, of course, sports has vanished, and we have seen the loss of the live talk shows, and those types of things have all vanished. I'm wondering how that's impacted your business. Why don't we start with Gary? I'd love to hear, have you seen an increase in licensing activity, be it people trying to fill holes in their schedules because of this? How has that impacted your business? And Vim, I'm interested in your comments here, and also any color that the others can provide. So Gary, why don't you opine first?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, I think everyone's in the same boat in terms of, you know, not being able to produce content with the COVID restrictions, and that's something that's happening around the world. I know speaking to our sales teams, and this isn't my area of expertise, so I wouldn't go too far in depth, but we're all working very busily at home, and some of them are saying they've never been busier. I've got a queue in business affairs to get my contracts through, and I've got a queue in operations, so that can only be a good thing. But yes, there is a lot of relicensing for sure. I think we were very lucky at all three in terms of having some of our new content come through the year quite early. But I think broadcasters, it also goes downstream. So our dubbing house is open as you get into Europe. So I think there has been relicensing of content where dubs already exist in house. And then look, for my part of the business, it's very much business as usual, because at the moment, where AVOD really is that longer tail of content. So we've got a wonderful library of content, and it's already delivered, so it doesn't really impact my part of the business.
Very good, very good. Vim, what are you seeing? Are you seeing an increase in licensing activity?
So definite increase in licensing activity. I think there are holes in the schedule that need to be filled. I don't just think it's an artificial optic, though. People genuinely are interested and keen in seeing content that they are familiar with. There is an element of comfort that comes with what people think is content they have seen in probably happier times, and whether that is really vintage or whether that is sort of the best of. As you know, we're bringing some of the best elements of Big Brother, as an example, back to the UK. We are bringing Deal or No Deal back in certain territories. On AVOD, McLeod's Daughters is something that continues to do extremely well across the globe. And I don't think it's just our content. I think a lot of that content that people are familiar with, probably associate happy feelings with, that reminds them that there is a world out there they can connect with, does very, very well. And from the nodding I see going on is I think something.
Yeah, it seems to be connecting. Roma, I see you nodding vigorously.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's not only applying to our audiences, but even us as people, right? You want something comforting in a very hard to emotionally manage time. I mean, we're seeing that with again, our children's content is taking off. A lot of it is very feel good, and it really promotes positive messages. For us, because the CBC is also a news organization, our live streaming didn't necessarily take a hit in terms of volume, because we've got sort of live news coming through all the time, and we actually opened up. We made the decision to open up our premium news channel, which is usually behind either a paywall and OTT, or is under a cable package. It's a subscription. We work with our BDUs, our MVPD partners, to actually make that available to everybody in a free view on broadcast, and then in front of the wall. So we saw a lot of live streaming consumption go up. I think the combination is really that, looking for comfort. People are consuming a lot of this stuff, but again, I think going back to the point around the saturation, not only is the weather getting better, and we typically see that summer dip, but it's also how much news can you watch, right? Because it sits so heavy on you. So we're lucky in that we had a pipeline that was fairly good, at least on the OTT side, for a while. But that said, even something like Coronation Street, which is, we have a partnership with ITV, and we bring that into GEM, as a massive dedicated audience, and they're so passionate about it. And when that went down to a reduced production schedule for a while, like, that actually has a major impact on how people are consuming and when they are choosing to consume and how much, because we push that out day and date. In fact, I'm not going to lie, we actually had a celebration when it was declared an essential service. Coronation Street was. I tell you, I have never been so happy about anything in my life.
Nice.
So that's, it's a weird time, and I think we're following the bouncy ball on the behaviors. The audience behaviors are so nascent, it's so evolutionary, that we're all just trying to keep up with finding a balance between what we have, what people are asking for, and what they need.
Very good, very good. Okay, so I want to do our first a quick fire round here, where I ask you to answer in 20 seconds or less. So let's be uplifting, shall we? I want you to answer what excites you about the connected TV industry, connected TV delivery. right now. So 20 seconds or less. Let's start with you, Henry. What excites you?
From an ads perspective, I think just the technology enables that sort of interactivity feature. So you can start doing many unique and interesting things with ad products, whether it's interactivity, co-viewing, verification, and sort of, lead gen and those kind of things. So I think, that's something that you can do that you weren't necessarily able to do on traditional linear TV. Very good. Chris, what excites you?
This is very specific to my business, but it's the opportunity to bring music videos back to the living room. So they began life there 40 or so years ago. They rose to prominence and defined a new genre of short form content. They really allowed cable and satellite TV to break through via channels like MTV. And then in more recent times, with the onset of digital, music videos are really the dominant content source that help to drive new on-demand behaviors, those behaviors that we take as second nature now. And they're the first premium content to land on YouTube after launching as well. So 4 decades where music videos have really driven adoption of emerging platforms, and CTV is just the next logical step of that journey.
Gary, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it is just the sheer scale of the additional opportunity that brings when you have a large library of content, whether that's being able to curate our library into services that we have a little bit more control of, or whether that's licensed into, an ever-growing number of platforms. I mean, how sustainable the number is another question. And so, it's not saying that we don't want to do our traditional business. Our traditional business will always be our bread and butter, but it is extending that life cycle for our library and bringing it to the attention of more viewers.
Indeed. Wim, what do you think?
I think, first of all, as a user, a much better and more seamless experience in terms of consuming content. And then obviously as a pretty big distributor of content, a means of bringing our great content to more audiences and allowing them to engage with it rather than just consume it.
And Roma, finally.
I think that what excites me the most is the idea of being invited back into the living rooms. I think that connected TVs, and especially for service providers like GEM, from an OTT perspective, just being able to repatriate viewers or bring them in for the first time, the cord cutters, the cord shavers that, aren't as subscribed to the same level to a, cable TV construct. Before this, OTT viewing was very much one-to-one, right? You watched your show, or you watched, it wasn't a family experience necessarily. And I think to the earlier point, connected TVs, especially at this point in time, it's becoming more and more of the living room experience again. And that's exciting because you really, you open up a whole new bunch of avenues for discovery. You open up new audiences, especially those that you may not have had a chance with otherwise, especially on broadcast.
Very good. So one of the things I want to loop back is something that came up in your statements then, and that's this thing about distribution. It seems like the distribution ecosystem to connected TV is really filled out, and maybe filled out a little too much. So I would be very interested if you could let us know how you're thinking about your distribution strategy these days, because you do have so many options. So why don't we start with you, Henry? How are you thinking about your distribution options these days with connected TV?
Sure. Well, I mean, if you look at the options available to you, obviously there's the usual suspects of Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, Chromecast, Android TV, and then of course Xbox and PlayStation, which is actually very prevalent for us. I think, the way we think about it is obviously we want to maintain and engage the sort of relationship with the end user, with our fans, as directly as possible. So this is why we very much take an approach of the direct to consumer, so having our own native apps on those actual platforms. And we've initially stayed away for the time being from these channel distribution models, where going through a Roku channel or a Fire TV channels in some way, shape or form. And I think, a big part of that is because, we value the relationship with the end user. And also as well, that point is the most critical and the biggest priority for us, is that direct relationship. And I think you want to be careful when you get into these channel distribution models, is that you actually lose that relationship with the end user, because the actual platform themselves have them. So you go from going and getting a subscriber to actually just generating revenue from that end user who you don't know, and you can't cross-sell, upsell, retarget, encourage them to download your mobile app and those kind of things. So the way we think about it is super serving our audience, audience, fandom, and having that relationship with the end user.
So Amazon channels, the Roku channel, those are two examples of these aggregation plays. Roma, I saw you nodding your head very vigorously there. How are you thinking about those in particular, where they're reselling your content and maybe you don't have as much visibility as what's going on? Is it just a revenue relationship, or what do you think?
This is a fun conversation I get to have with our distribution teams a lot of the time, because CBC not only is a broadcaster and a sort of endpoint distribution service, but also we produce a lot of original content. So these are long form shows. These are and some fairly marquee titles like Schitt's Creek that just ended and Kim's Convenience and stuff like that. So for our distribution teams are distributing them in a fairly traditional model in some of these platforms. We sell into things like Netflix and Prime now and that type of thing. But beyond that, I think there is, and I'm going to echo a lot of what Henry said just now, which is that our belief from a GEM perspective was that we wanted that native distribution. We want that direct relationship with our audiences. We support them. Everything sort of end to end, right, all the way down to a customer service and cross sell, upsell, and all of that good stuff. Also helping bridge that gap between the consumer and the advertiser in a way that we feel tries to represent the consumer as best as possible. So it's a positive sort of experience. I think there always needs to be that debate. I think that there's a reality on the ground where there is a revenue question, and how are we going to make the money to do more of what we need to do. But it's always a debate. We're always sitting there making sort of trying to balance between the native experience. What does that cost? Because obviously it is these are very expensive. You don't build it takes money to build a good native experience in any of these platforms. The penetration in our market, not all markets have the same types of penetration with some of these platforms like Roku, and some are growing, and then this is a tough year, right, budget wise. Like we're trying to maintain operational continuity and consistency, and you got to make some hard choices sometimes.
Yeah, Chris, Vivo, you probably value the direct relationship with the consumer very much. Are you doing what other distribution mechanisms are you using?
Well, we have essentially quite a broad distribution model, and it's something that we term Vivo Everywhere, and it's something that's been quite aggressively pursued through our partnerships team. And as an overall business, our objectives are to maximise the commercial and promotional value of music videos. So when we're thinking about specifically connected TV, the strategy is just to provide access to audiences through as many OTT endpoints as possible. So whether that's a set-top box or a TV stick or an app on the screen, we just want our content to be available on all of them, so we can ensure the best possible experience for our viewers, and then also provide advertising partners with the greatest supply of premium co-viewed inventory in the most impactful environment. So in really simple terms, the strategy is about being as widely available as possible, and that will help us with the battle for attention with our audience.
Very good. And Wim and Gary, how are you thinking? I mean, there were so many places that you can go now to license your content. How are you thinking about distribution in the CTV space? Why don't we start with you quickly, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our sort of branded services, we're leaving that with our partners. I'll be absolutely honest that we are a content distributor, and we look at this very much more from bringing our editorial expertise to the table. I think what we're looking to do increasingly as we get data back from platforms is really understand what shows are working, what their core demographics are, and then rather than having every piece of content everywhere, because it is a what that content mix looks like.
Right, you dropped out there just for a second there, Gary.
Okay.
That's okay. Vin, what do you think? How are you thinking about your distribution strategy in these blossoming times, shall we call them?
Yeah, so I think, like Gary, we haven't really ventured into the direct to consumer space in terms of launching our own streaming service. I definitely do think it probably is something that as as a content production industry is something we probably should be looking at. Having spent a fair amount of time at Yahoo prior to joining here, I think a lot of these platforms, in particular in the AVOD space, have probably a tendency to drive towards a race to the bottom. And I think actually as a connected TV industry, I think Europe is behind on North America in terms of uptake, and definitely in terms of uptake of advertisers actually spending money actively in the connected TV space. I would hope that there is going to be a catch up on that pretty soon. But it cannot be the YouTube model where basically CPMs are so low that actually it makes no sense to produce anything that is going to be perceived by the advertising community as valuable in terms of spending real money on it. And I think also from a connected TV industry, it's in the interest of the industry to continue to invest and probably not undersell. And where I see the potential for that is that you have different models. So you have what I call linear digital, which is basically sort of scheduled and served in a different way, but still linear, which I think leads extremely well to that type of event viewing, which is essentially TV, but connected TV delivered in a different way. And then you have the really on-demand side of it, both on the AVOD and the SVOD space. And so I think the industry is going to need to figure out how to make sure there isn't a massive amount of value dilution there. And so we haven't launched directly in that direct-to-consumer space. I think we see ourselves as a distributor. I think with a new joint entity, and I think if we want to we want to generate value, I think also on the content producer side of things, there probably is, and there are probably alliances to be formed there to make sure that we are well represented and we make sure we extract the right value from the content and the IP essentially we produce. Very long answer, I know.
Very good. So let's talk about advertising for just a second. We're getting kind of tight for time, so if you could keep your responses relatively short. Is connected TV now beginning to deliver sufficient value that it is attracting or will attract television advertising dollars, or are we still in a developing market and we're not quite there yet? So who wants to jump in on that one first? Henry, you're nodding.
Sure. I think we've definitely sort of crossed the sort of the threshold and the tipping point in the seesaw, particularly from the US perspective. I think advertisers, traditionally sort of the old sort of media buying sort of, would just say TV, linear, this is what I want. But I think the mindset has shifted now, where all of a sudden everyone nearly or will almost nearly have a connected TV device in their house in some way, shape or form. So if you're an advertiser, you're actually sort of getting bottlenecked or sort of forced over to the connected TV side of things, because that's where the audience is going. So we see this a lot and we hear this anecdotally a lot from obviously the sales teams on the ground is, they can't get any more linear there's just linear hit the capacity. So they're like, well, I've got these dollars, they have to be spent. So, well, let's go and park them in the CTV side of things. And there's so much more added value to it as well. Just the targeting is there. Obviously sort of the interactivity and the technology enables those kind of things. So we're definitely seeing a shift, and it's happening, and it's sort of continuing to accelerate even pre-COVID world. So we're certainly seeing this, and for us, from our perspective, it's CTV is our fastest growing platform, and it won't be long before it'll be bigger than the mobile platforms, which were traditionally the places to be from the digital perspective.
Same for you, Roma?
Oh, yes, completely. In fact, advertisers have been asking for more, and we cannot generate enough inventory at this point. People are, and they want to be adjacent to premium content, right? So that's the other thing, is that these environments are so conducive to premium viewing experiences, and it's the experience not only within the video itself, so in terms of pre-rolls and mid-rolls and that type of thing, but the thing that happens around the content. So now there are the much more integrated buys in terms of a sponsorship that has placement within the merchandising in those environments as well as within the content. So there's adjacency in a number of different ways that we're able to offer. Echoing what Henry just said around things like targeting, we're able to follow eyeballs in a very different way. One of the places that we're starting to invest, or continuing to invest, is the fact that CBC has a broad digital ecosystem of something like between 16 and 20 million, depending on the month, people that show up every month. Some of a portion of which are on GEM, but the rest of them are elsewhere as well. And so creating these avenues with these seamless journeys, and the connected TV thing actually really just drives that home for a lot of advertisers. I don't think, it's less about the overflow. I think people are actually gravitating toward these connected TV environments for us. And again, like that audience cannot grow fast enough for the advertisers in a lot of places.
Very good. Chris, you're nodding as well. I
am, yeah. The demand for connected TV has been there certainly over the last 12 to 18 months, and we're seeing that growing before COVID-19, and we're definitely, as I mentioned before, seeing that accelerate. I think clients understand that the audiences, streaming audiences, are valuable because they're typically hard to reach via traditional channels. So certainly in the UK market, the traditional TV buyers have started to migrate to connected TV, but the destination for that is broadcaster VOD. And those platforms are often challenged by frequency management and heavy ad loads, etc. So the aim, I guess, is to try and drive education and allow advertisers to try and broaden their horizons, not just to look at broadcast VOD, and also not just to look at longer form content as well. There's one thing that often gets overlooked is that valuable audiences aren't just confined to that longer form content. There's huge value in audiences that consume that short form content. I'm not talking about user generated content, I'm talking about premium short form content. They can be just as captive an audience, in some ways more so. They lean in, they watch it for a short period of time, they're hugely engaged with it, they've actively sought it out, and then they're gone. And in that time, they might have just been served one ad, which is obviously a great exchange in terms of a value perspective. And then it's also it's a great advertising environment for brands as well. So if you piece all of that together, there's extremely rich and efficient opportunities on connected TV over and above what you might just see on broadcast VOD.
So are there any other barriers that we see that's really slowing the growth of connected TV, aside from us waiting for all of these television dollars to migrate across? Why don't we start with you, Wim, and then I'll move to Gary.
So I think there's a difference between North America and Europe. So I definitely do think, as I mentioned earlier, that Europe is behind in that shift, definitely in dollars. I think we are in Europe in a market that is likely way more dominated by agencies and existing trading agreements, where there are probably less advertiser direct relationships in what I think a lot of the customers might be perceiving as digital ad dollars. And I think the industry needs to make sure this advertising doesn't get pushed in the commodity corner in a very similar way as has probably happened on CPM buys on platforms like YouTube, etc., that have been around a little bit longer, by making sure that the focus and the emphasis is on the targeting capabilities, is on the personalization, is on the fact that you're essentially serving an ad on a really big screen. That should actually allow you to make something that is beautifully personalized and more relevant to ultimately the user. And I get very excited when I hear all these studies around, okay, you actually know whether it's multiple people watching and who's watching in the room, and I think that data is only going to add to the experience.
Very good. So Gary, it looks like you're going to have the last word here. We're just about out of time. So what do you think? Anything else that's inhibiting our growth?
No, look, I mean, we stay out of the advertising side. We leave that to the platforms and to our partners. We are very much coming at it from a content point of view. I mean, the two things I would observe is, you've got to look at the broadband infrastructure. We see cut out on calls like this. The slowest street in the UK, I just had a look before this actually, has 0.22 megabits of a broadband service. So that's not going to work. So, you have that barrier to entry. And then just from a pure content point of view, we have services coming to us saying we're going to launch in this part of Europe, that part of Europe. And the reality is that English speaking is quite easy for an English speaking distributor, but accessing the dubs or actually, funding those dubs is a massive hurdle to doing a mass content deal across Europe.
Very good. Oh, that's on that last word. I think we're pretty much out of time. I want to thank all of you, Roma, Gary, Henry, Chris, and Wim. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you, audience, for your attention. And I don't know what's coming up next, but stick around. There's lots more to come in Videoscape. This has been Colin Dixon with Endscreen Media.